Going to look at Ní Chuilléanáin here relatively quickly. Don't forget she's one of the 4 Irish poets and one of the 4 female poets prescribed for study. She's a good chance of coming up. The maths are very simple. With 5 poets being examined, you have to have 4 ready. That's your bare minimum. I would always recommend you have 5 ready because that would guarantee a choice. But I do believe if you've got all 4 of those Irish poets or all 4 of those female poets plus Hopkins are done, well, you guaranteed a choice. Probably 3. Could even get 4 out of 5 poets this year. It's all about the question that you're going to answer. Ní Chuilléanáin's a really interesting poet. Her work, it's not easily categorized, so it's not. So it's personal. There's lyric element to her poetry. She writes about her, her family and her experience of life. So in that sense, it has that personal element. It's deeply philosophical. So kind of connections to Heaney, I suppose, in the way she kind of draws the macro from the micro. She looks at, individual circumstances and then draws kind of deeper life lessons from that are like applicable to us all, kind of universal lessons in poems like Death and Engines and A Bend in the Road, which is a great poem. But she's also a narrative poet and highly imaginative. Like she makes stories up. So you might have read Street or the brilliant All for You. And then, of course, you've got a poem like Translation for the Reburial of the Magdalens, which is a poem about, it's about injustice. But it's like, it's not about philosophy. It's not about her experience of the world. It's a piece of social commentary. So certainly, a variety of thematic concerns absolutely applicable to this poet. And of course, she famously, her work is not, it's quite abstract. She relies a lot on symbolism and I suppose from the point of view of someone like me, the reason I quite like her poetry is because it requires me to think. It's challenging. Now, if I'm doing my Leaving Cert and I've got 6 subjects to prepare and 5 poets to do, that probably does my nut in. So maybe you don't love her, but I suppose the thing about her work is it can be challenging because it is quite cryptic at times. There's this element of the mysterious to her poetry. It is open to interpretation, but I think that's a good thing. The first quote there from A Bend in the Road, piled high, wrapped lightly, like the one cumulus cloud in a perfect sky, just kind of captures the essence for me of what Ní Chuilléanáin is. You've got this beautiful, vivid image of the cloud and the blue sky. So that symbolism is really important. And she's using it to represent the idea of memory and how memory stays with us. And we carry it with us as we go through our lives. And for me, again, always open to interpretation. The perfect sky is, the blue sky on a lovely day. A cumulus cloud is a rain cloud. So memory sometimes that we carry with us can trouble us. And I think that fits in with the overall, when we're reminded of difficult events or painful, traumatic experiences. And I think that fits in with the overall concerns expressed in that poem. It's a really lovely poem. We'll come to it in more detail in a moment. Okay, so let's get down to it, okay? They're the poems I teach by Ní Chuilléanáin. Again, you have to have 4 to 5 poems. I like 6, but 4 to 5 poems is your number. She writes about change and transience, the connection between the past and the present, which is of course interrelated. She's really interested in love, both romantic and within families. Justice and injustice I mentioned already in Translation. Fate, in other words, the idea that, our destiny is kind of written before we make our decisions and live our lives. It's an interesting philosophical observation that she deals with. And of course, she celebrates beauty in the way most poets do. So all these things are evident in, across these poems, okay? Her work, as I said, is deeply philosophical. So she's always thinking, and of course you're going to say, I hope that you like that, because as she thinks, she forces us to think about things like the nature of relationships. One of the things, the importance of commemoration, that if you've ever been to Glasnevin, it's a fantastic place to visit, Glasnevin in Dublin Cemetery. And like that memorial to the Magdalene women is a really important memorial. And she forces us to think about why that's important. in that poem. And again, she makes us think about things like fate. Like, you know, there's a great line, and I'll get it wrong now, but it's in this map. In the poem she wrote for the occasion of her son's marriage to Niall Woods and, excuse the mispronunciation, Xenia Ostrovskia. She talks about, like, you know, when you're both looking at the same star. It's lovely. The idea that, like, you know, almost like you're destined to meet and then to share your lives together. So these are all thought-provoking ideas that she addresses in her poetry. When it comes to love, she looks at love from kind of a global perspective, loads of different observations about love, about how we don't always fall in love with the type of people we expect to, so we can become, it's not rational or reasoned. It can cause us to behave in a way which is obsessive. It's mysterious. It's very hard to figure out. It can make us feel completed. It lasts beyond death, so it keeps us connected to people that we lose, and it enriches our lives. Now, these are all really wonderful, interesting observations about love. Stylistically, she makes allusions in her poetry. So, you know, that gives her poetry a particular quality, I suppose. It enriches the poetry, giving it substance and meaning and rewarding repeated reading. So, you know, she refers across those three poems to the Sleeping Beauty and Hansel and Gretel and Beauty and the Beast stories. She also refers to this Russian folk tale about the firebird who stole a golden apple in Niall Woods and Xenia. In the same poem, she refers to the Book of Ruth, which is really clever. And of course, she refers to the Nativity, or the story of the birth of Christ in the opening sequence of All For You. So these allusions, they all add, you know, as I keep on saying, a depth and a substance. Makes the work more interesting to read. Challenging. Why is she referring to that there? Why? What's the relevance? Making us think for ourselves. She's a narrative poet. And, you know, she brings places and scenes to life. In, you know, the bend in the road, it's that bend in the road where the tree was like a cat's tail. In All For You, it's that arrival when the gates were open and the donkey put its head in the manger. And in Street, it's the, you know, famous scene with the slanting lane. In translation, it's the interior of the Magdalen laundry and the steam and the hiss of the water. And yeah, so she brings people and places to life. So let's get down then to the kind of quotes. As you know, I think a core thing to prepare for all the poets are symbols that allow you to talk about how they use imagery to not just stimulate the senses, but to convey points. And, for example, in All For You, she says, "Where better to lie down and sleep among the label shelves with the key still in your pocket?" Now, I think the key, that's a really brilliant symbol. So to lie down and sleep, you know, among the label shelves, there's a sense of completion there that, like, you know, okay, our journey is over. We found each other. We're in this, you know, in that poem, the mansion is representative of that feeling of being enriched by love, but the key still in the other person's pocket is representative of, well, our individuality, I suppose. And if you look at it in a positive way, Ní Chuilléanáin, once in a reply to an email, I asked her about the meaning of that. She said her understanding of the line is that it's about not giving up on your individuality, and I think you can look at it as well and say, okay, that's 100% correct. It comes from the poet's mouth, but also about the idea that, you know, when we fall in love with somebody, there's always something that we hold back as well, something of ourselves. So you can look at that in a kind of a more nuanced way. In The Bend in the Road, brilliant repetition. You are taller now than us. The tree is taller. Just a brilliant symbol to represent the idea of change, that nothing is permanent. Things are constantly evolving. I mentioned the quote from The Bend in the Road about the cloud. You know, in Niall Woods, when she's talking to her son, she has a bit of sense of humour at the beginning of that poem when she says, you know, when you both look at the same star, she says, "That is the time to set out on your journey with half a loaf and your mother's blessing." It's great, witty observation, but the journey is the symbol. And marriage is the beginning of a journey, a shared journey, a new experience of life. The Butcher's Daughter on her own in Street is a fantastic metaphor for love and how, mysterious it is and how irrational it can make us and how we don't always fall in love with the people that we think we're going to fall in love with. Like as unromantic a heroine as you can imagine, walking along with the blood dripping from her knife, and yet the figure in it is fascinated by her. That fascination and the mystery of love and the kind of exciting tension at the beginning of a loving relationship is captured in that image at the end of that poem of him standing, and there's a door which stands half open. And like, does he go in? Does he follow up those bloody footsteps up the stairs? It's all, allegorical. It's not supposed to be taken literally. It's the story represents the idea of the unknown and the excitement in a romantic loving relationship. In one of the greatest images in her poetry, which translation is a very important poem. I've already done a video on it. She describes how difficult it is to cope with injustice. She tries to get into the head of somebody who has been treated as badly as these women were treated by our state, by our authorities, by their own families often. And she says she captures it in this idea of every pocket in her skull blared with the note. And that's not clearly not meant to be taken literally. But this idea of like a white noise, an unbearable, blaring single note in her head that you just couldn't cope with. That's the poet's imagined way to capture the immense sense of frustration and powerlessness, impotence, anger that must have been felt by those women when they were locked away in those laundries, often separated from their children. Fireman's Lift is lovely. She's talking in that poem about looking at a piece of art and how if you have a bit of distance you can take it all in and appreciate it. Up close you might not be able to see all the details, you have to step back sometimes to appreciate the grandeur of it. And of course that's a metaphor for relationships. That poem is not about the fresco, Correggio's fresco. The poem is about her relationship with her mother. Sorry. And sometimes we have extraordinary things in our lives, and because we're close up to them every day, like our relationship with the people that we love, we don't really step back ever and really appreciate them. But when we step back and there's distance, for example, if we lose somebody, then we can suddenly appreciate the work in its entirety. So just so many interesting things you can say. If you were able to just talk about some of those metaphors, you'd have loads to say. Don't fucking summarize the poems, lads. Don't tell me the story of the poems. Reach into the poems. Take out moments that are relevant to a question and explore them. They're always going to ask about language, and having a knowledge of the metaphors is going to help. The imagery of, these motifs, life as a journey, clouds, keys. These are things that also feature in her work and are important elements of her work that connect the work together. But it's also this polemic and sensual qualities. If you read Ní Chuilléanáin's poetry, you'll often see like onomatopoeia or sibilance, the appealing to those various different senses that makes the experience of reading the work immersive. So yeah, that's Ní Chuilléanáin. That's her, the key elements of her work that I would look at if I was you. There's obviously loads more. They're in the notes that we looked at and that we studied together. When you're answering a question on her, you're looking for a question that's going to be allowing you to talk about her philosophical concerns, her narrative style, her use of symbolism and imagery to communicate her themes, and the fact that her work is not always easy to read because it requires us to think, it challenges us to interpret, and that is, you're going to say, even if you don't believe it, a rewarding quality in her work. I hope you found that useful.